Good afternoon to everyone here in Israel. Good morning to those of you in the United States. My name is Alex Trayman. I'm coming to you live from the Jerusalem JNS Media Hub here. I am joined by JNS military analyst Yaakov Lapin, who's been writing for JNS for many, many years, covering all of the military developments here in Israel and the greater Middle East. We are in day 17 of war. I literally just came back from the bomb shelter. We had sirens and missiles exploding overhead in Jerusalem. Yaakov, we are in day 17 of this war. It began on Saturday, February 27th, with sirens blaring all across the country, signaling that Israel had, in fact, opened up a war, which we later learned was done jointly together with the United States in Iran, targeting the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, many of his top advisors in one blow. And since then, we are now in the third week of war. Yaakov, let's talk a little bit about what the goals of this war are. We know that Iran has nuclear weapons development, that they have ballistic missiles, which they're firing at Israel and all across the region. But there seems that there could be even other goals of this war. Yaakov, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Alex, and it's always great to be on a webinar with you. So let me just preface by saying that, JNS is really the only place that I am able to get into the deep dive and the details and the analysis, and it's an utterly unique opportunity for me. I'm very grateful for that. And also, if anybody wants to check out my podcast, they can also do that by simply typing the Lapin assessment into Google, and they will also see various options there. Now, the goals of the war, Alex, are twofold. First of all, from the defense establishment's perspective, when you talk to the defense officials, as I've been doing pretty much on a daily basis, the first thing that they talk about is an existential threat, an immediate existential threat that was posed by the Iranian ballistic missile program. Now, if we put that into perspective, on the eve of this war, on the 28th of February, the Iranian missile program had 2,500 ballistic missiles. That's a number that I managed to get the IDF spokesperson to declassify, something that I asked him about, and within 24 hours, he was able to come back to me after the war broke out. Until then, it had been classified. Why was it classified? Because once it became clear to the Iranians and to the rest of the world, really, that Israeli intelligence was aware of that number, it was clear that Israel was already heading towards an attack. It's almost automatic because the Iranian missile program was designed to reach 8,000 ballistic missiles. We're talking about threats with 1-ton warheads. Imagine what happened at Bet Shemesh with the Iranian ability to do that 8,000 times.
Right. That was an attack that killed 9 people as a missile hit a home and a nearby synagogue, even crushing a bomb shelter in Bet Shemesh.
Exactly. And so no matter how good your air defenses are, and Israel has the best air defense system in the world, we can talk about it if you like, no system can stand up to that level of saturation. And this is an existential threat, even if you remove the nuclear story, even if you isolate the missile program, just these conventional warheads at that scale as an existential threat to a country as small as Israel, where most of the population is focused in central Israel and the Jerusalem area, the economic hub. This is a completely unacceptable risk. One of the key lessons of October 7th is that jihadist enemies will not be allowed to build up capabilities while Israel sits on the sidelines. And so that was the immediate trigger, and the main goal is to roll that back. Now, once the decision was made to go to war, and of course the United States decided to join that effort because it was very clear, the Trump administration was very clear that this is a huge security threat to the United States as well. The Iranians were working on intercontinental ballistic missiles. They were working on destabilizing the Middle East. They had terror cells, and they still do, operating throughout the West. And so the Trump administration was very clear-eyed that this is an obvious major threat to the United States as well. And once the decision to go for a broad campaign was taken, other goals were attached to that. First of all, the nuclear program. Even though the nuclear program is receiving less attention by the Israeli and American Air Force, there have been critical strikes. One was on a hidden nuclear site just outside of Tehran. The Iranian nuclear scientists thought that nobody had paid attention, but they actually were continuing the nuclear program in a hidden site, and they were conducting critical tests on how to detonate nuclear warheads. That site was destroyed, and there were a few other nuclear sites that were hit. The three main nuclear sites in Isfahan, in Natanz, and in Fordow, those remain heavily damaged from back in the June war. The big question going forward is what's going to happen to that 400 kilograms of enriched uranium, which is buried, half of it under Isfahan, and the other half is apparently buried under the nuclear sites at Natanz and Fordow. That's a big question mark that needs to be answered by the end of this campaign. So retaining the achievements of the June war and keeping the nuclear program degraded a second core goal. A third goal is, of course, to destabilize as much as possible the Iranian regime. And as a result, we're seeing many strikes targeting the Basij. This is the internal repressive mechanism that the Iranian regime uses to basically commit mass murder against unarmed Iranian civilians. 35,000 reportedly killed back in January by this force. They're heavily armed with machine guns and Kalashnikovs. Many of their headquarters and commanders have been eliminated. So those are the main goals of this war. It's to roll back the existential threat posed by the missile program, the nuclear program, to destabilize the regime, and also to go after the regime's ability to produce further weapons. Their arms industry has been heavily targeted, and their ability to activate their terror proxy network, heavily targeted. Many of the senior IRGC terrorists who supply Hezbollah, Hamas, who fund, have been eliminated. So everybody from the Iranian leadership down to field terrorists are on the target list. The IRGC has lost thousands of operatives already, and tens of thousands have been injured. So as a headline, Alex, I'd say those are the main goals in that order.
Let's talk a little bit about the unprecedented cooperation between Israel and the United States. I mean, we've never seen anything like that. Certainly, none of the wars that Israel's fought before have you had this type of intensive cooperation, whereby this is actually a joint operation. It was interesting to see Pete Hegseth say in his press conference earlier this week that the IRGC looks up in the sky and they see the stars and stripes and the Star of David, and they've talked about is United States being the number one air force in the world, Israel being the number two air force in the world. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the United States, their role in this war versus the role of Israel. What's the division of labor?
Sure. So this is historic for many reasons. First of all, as you said in your question, the IRGC, which is the elite leading organization in Iran, has become a hunted organization in its own country. That in itself is historic. Never before has the IDF or the Israeli Air Force gone into war in a full-fledged manner with the United States. That is history. In fact, the last time Israel fought in a coalition with anybody was in 1956 in the Sinai campaign with Britain and France. So the United States is used to fighting in coalitions, but this is Israel's first time in the modern era of fighting in a coalition with the United States. Absolutely historic. In terms of the division of labor, it's very interesting because you're seeing how every side here is bringing its relative advantage to the fight. The opening decapitation strike, again, historic, 200 fighter jets. Never before in the Israeli Air Force's history have 200 jets taken off at the same time, headed east. They targeted 3 meetings that were being held simultaneously. The Iranians were very arrogant, and they did not believe that in their bunkers they were vulnerable. They didn't learn the lesson of Hassan Nasrallah, who was targeted in his bunker in Beirut. So the ability of the Israeli Air Force to surprise the enemy, to use very precise real-time intelligence, which is provided to it by the IDF military intelligence branch, and to go after the Iranian leadership, knowing exactly where they are. Think about the visual mapping abilities that you need. You need to know where these individuals are relative to the streets of Tehran, because these are bunkers, these are sprawling bunkers to know where to drop the bombs and to guide the air-to-surface missiles. You have to know exactly where they are relative to the surface map. It's an extremely complex operation, and there are only two air forces in the world that can do it. It's the Israeli Air Force and the U.S. Air Force. This mission went to the Israeli Air Force. I'll just say, by the way, that the sheer power and the symbolism of eliminating Khamenei, we're not talking about a secretary general of a terror organization, a non-state enemy. We're talking about the head of a state, somebody who is in charge of 92 million people, even though most of them despise him. He's considered holy by fundamentalist Shiites. And to eliminate him is something, in my view, that is going to reverberate for generations. This is an enormously powerful symbolic act, as well as having very important operational ramifications. And I don't think this is something that's going to be forgotten. And I say that because we're already hearing, some criticism. Oh, he's been replaced by Mujtaba Khamenei, his son. He's just as radical. What did we achieve? And I truly believe that that's a nonsensical question. When you eliminate somebody who's been leading the Islamic Revolution for a number of decades, no amount of replacement is going to erase from people's memory the sheer symbolism of the fact that Israel is signaling that anybody who is committed to destroying it will be eliminated by Israel first.
Let's talk a little bit about the U.S. buildup, the military buildup here in the Middle East. We've seen numerous ships from the aircraft carriers, the Ford, the Lincoln in the area, but there are other destroyers. There are submarines. What has the U.S. brought to the region, and what are they using to fight this war?
Okay, so the USA military under CENTCOM area of command, they started this war with 2 carrier strike groups. Now they're bringing in a third, the George Bush. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a very significant level of firepower. Each carrier strike group carries with it squadrons of fighter jets from, the F-35s to F-18s. And they also have close ground air support aircraft. They've got electronic warfare aircraft. Let's remember that the U.S. Has military bases spread throughout the Middle East as well. Places like Jordan, they brought F-22 Raptors to Israel. And they have B-52 and B-2 bombers. Some of them can take off from the United States and directly fly over Iranian targets and back. Some can take off from Diego Garcia, which is a military base out in the Indian Ocean. So the U.S. brought unprecedented firepower, and they were targeting a whole range of families of targets, from missile bases, underground deep missile bases. The Iranian Navy essentially wiped out by the American military. Lots of infrastructure targets. Their relative advantage is the very large bombs that these specific U.S. Air Force bombers can bring to the theater. That's something that Israel doesn't have with its fighter jets, as incredible as they are. So we're seeing both a geographic division of labor. We saw the U.S. Air Force more focused on the east of Iran, even though the Israeli Air Force was also striking targets in the east of Iran, which is the furthest point away from Israel. And we saw the Israeli Air Force much more focused on Tehran, southern Iran, and western Iran. So very interesting division of labor, and they're really functioning, Alex, as one military entity. There's joint command centers here. The level of coordination between the heads of Air Force, the heads of the intelligence, you have to know exactly where each side is operating, so there are no double strikes, so that there are no accidents. The level of coordination, real-time command and control and coordination here is truly unprecedented. And this is something that both militaries have been working on to build for many years through drills and through meetings. A continuous flow of cooperation now coming to bear.
Let's talk a little bit about refueling midair. Right, Israel has some abilities to refuel midair. They showed the ability to fire in Iran during the 12-day war, Operation Rising Lion. They also have conducted strikes inside Yemen at significant distances away from Israel. But the United States obviously bringing many more refueling planes to the theater. Tell me a little bit about the refueling stockpile that the U.S. has and how the two air forces are working together to basically conduct 24/7 sorties against Iran.
So the refueling assets are essential for these long-range missions for both air forces. Even though Israel also has a number of select aircraft that can make the journey to Iran without refueling, still most of the Air Force requires these refueling services. And the fact that some of these American refuelers are open to Israeli aircraft is really a game changer because it opens up many new operational avenues. Let's call it that. Look, the refueling is basically, an aerial gas station. It requires the most skilled pilots to make sure that everything is in the right place at the right time, the rendezvous. None of this is trivial. Knowing exactly where to meet in the aerial, theater of operations. And there are whole lines of jets that require this refueling service. So this is very intricate. This is the most a skilled level of integration and coordination that's imaginable when you have this many jets at any given moment, hundreds of jets, multiple squadrons, and most of them need refueling, and the refueling is being done, across both militaries. Absolutely, it's a game changer. So the fact that the Americans brought so many refuelers, and Israel has its own refueling fleet, which is obviously significantly smaller, but when you put it all together, what you see is these jets receiving extended ranges that enables them not only to go and hit their targets, and let's remember that many of these targets are being hit. The jets don't even necessarily have to fly into Iranian airspace in some of these strikes. Because of the new technology and what they call standoff munitions, some of these missiles can be dropped far from Iran. But still, these are very long journeys. Some of them require journeys straight into the heart of Iranian airspace. And so, for this kind of long-range mission, you need lots of refuelers in the air at any given time. And it's certainly a critical component without which we wouldn't see this scale of consistent, persistent attacks.
We saw that there was incidents with two refuelers earlier this week, one that crashed and 6 crew members reported dead on a U.S. refueler. A second refueler also damaged, but somehow managed to make its way back and land safely at Ben Gurion Airport. Do we have any idea what happened to those refuelers?
So, first of all, I have to confess I'm much more preoccupied with Israeli operations following that because there's just so much to track than I am the American. I'm watching the American operations more from a distance. But what I can tell you, generally speaking, and from what I know about air forces, is that as soon as you're flying out of an airbase that you're not used to, even if you're the best pilot in the world, that creates a lot of challenges. This is something that the Israeli Air Force has also had to train to know how to do just in case any air bases are taken out of commission, something that thankfully has not happened. And I remember, being told in briefings by Air Force officials, the minute that you're out of your home base, all of the familiar becomes unfamiliar. And it's not trivial. It's knowing, where runways are and how long you have left. And so, the U.S. Air Force is basically operating very far from its home bases. Of course, it's used to that because it's by definition an expeditionary force operating globally, but still it's challenging. And I think that this level of lack of prior, let's say, familiar knowledge of some of these bases increases the chances of very tragic and sad accidents like the ones that you mentioned. So I would put it down to that. Operating out of new bases, unfamiliar terrain, all of these things, unfortunately, increase the risk of very, very tragic accidents.
And we've also heard about accidents of American jets over Kuwait that may have been shot down by Patriot batteries in friendly fire episodes, incidents. But let's talk a little bit about the air superiority. Iran was supposed to have air defenses. And of course, Israel had taken out many of those air defenses during that 12-day war in June, the Operation Rising Lion. But certainly creating air superiority over the skies of Iran makes it easier for both the U.S. and Israel to bring certain planes to carry out missions that otherwise are not stealth. Tell me a little bit about the systems that Iran had and what Israel and the United States have done to take out those systems.
So it's interesting because this is the second time that Israel has achieved air superiority over the whole of Iran. And it's now the first time that the United States is also fully enjoying that air superiority. And look, Iran had a combination of Russian-made air defense systems and its own homemade air defense systems. Some of them have radars that can detect aircraft for hundreds of kilometers, and some of them have more limited radars, more localized, that are attached to more primitive surface-to-air missile launch systems. But every one of these systems is a real threat to the operators in the air. So, it's absolutely incredible the way that the first wave, which was launched by the Israeli Air Force, which had to do a lot of the heavy lifting to achieve that initial air superiority for the second time. First of all, I think the fact that this is the second time that the Israeli Air Force is doing this gives the pilots, the navigators, the commanders a lot of confidence, because they know that they've done this before and they know that they can do it. The first time was really an experiment. Nobody knew if it would work back in June in Operation Rising Lion. Now in Operation Roaring Lion, they already know what the capability gap is between the Israeli and American systems and the Iranian air defense systems, and the gap is significant. So I think it's a combination of things, Alex. Just to say in a sentence, we got the stealth aircraft, which obviously is very hard to detect, and you have to assume that they're going to be in the first wave to knock out air defenses. 80% of Iranian air defenses have been knocked out already, demolished. Electronic warfare to blind them. And then that paves a path for the older jets, the fourth generation jets, and they continuously wiping out radars and surface-to-air missiles and personnel until they have no air defenses left, and that's pretty much where we are in most of Iran today.
Is the assessment that most of the air defenses that Iran had Russian-made and Chinese-made air defenses? And what does that say about the level of those air defenses versus Israel and the United States' capabilities?
So I actually think that in this particular war, unlike the June war, most of Iran's air defenses were homemade. And they were basically replicating some Russian S-300 technology, which was considered a pretty good air defense system. They made their own system. If I remember correctly, it's called the Bavar 373. They also tried to smuggle that system out to Hezbollah and to the Assad regime when it existed, before it collapsed. And this was basically Iranians trying to copy that technology and even upgrade and increase it. And they also had some more localized Russian-made systems. What this essentially tells us, both the June war and this war, is that American-made and Israeli-made technology and operators basically have a major advantage as attackers over these air defense systems. These air defense systems are not capable of stopping the Israeli and American Air Force. They're not capable of detecting the threat in time. They're not capable of shooting our jets or the American jets out of the sky, and that's what they're designed to do. So this is a major blow to these systems, to their prestige, and it's a huge, the opposite effect for the Israeli-made systems. We have to remember that between wars, we have basically an arms race of the mind between the Iranian engineers and the Israeli engineers and the American engineers. They're all working, watching each other, and trying to upgrade their systems for the moment that they encounter it. And then this is the stress test. This is the real test. And the tests have been passed with flying colors, thankfully. You can see it on the ground. You can see the results. Achieving air superiority is absolutely critical, because that's what enables not only the jets to operate wherever they need to operate, but also the drones, the armed drones that are all over Iran, gathering intelligence. They can also fire their own munitions, and they have persistent eyes in the sky. So that helps us detect the mobile missile launchers. Most of the missiles, I'm willing to bet that the missile that you just had to take cover from was probably fired from a mobile missile launcher. These are civilian trucks that are disguised as they're made to look as civilian trucks. I'll correct myself. Of course, they're military trucks. But when you look at them from above, they look like civilian trucks. You have to have a persistent eye in the sky to track them down, find out what's suspicious about them, and hit them, and find out where they came from. So drones are also an essential part of that. This is what aerial superiority enables. And we also had some incredible footage, Alex, yesterday released by the Israeli Air Force, showing a UAV hangar where Iran has launched many UAVs at Israel and the Gulf countries. By the way, every UAV that Iran has launched at Israel, without exception, has been intercepted, which I think is an incredible statistic. We're talking about 100% interception rate. Not the case, unfortunately, for the Gulf countries, but they've had some interceptions. And you can see the hangar being demolished. You see the personnel, the launch squads running away, and they themselves being eliminated by an Israeli aircraft. I mean, that's what air superiority looks like.
We'll talk a little bit about the drones, and then we'll talk a little bit about the ballistic missiles, because obviously Iran is fighting back, firing back all across the region as a result of the U.S. and the Israeli attacks. When you talk about the drones, you mentioned that every drone that has been sent towards Israel has been intercepted. How does Israel go about intercepting drones?
It has a multi-layered defense system against the drone threat. The first part of that system, and this is true for all air defenses, whether you're talking about missiles, rockets, drone mortars, the most important part of any air defense is the detection. It's the radar. If you don't see the threat, it doesn't matter how good. If the boxer doesn't see the incoming punch, it doesn't matter how good his combination is. He's going to get hit. And so the detection is the number one thing. After that, Israel has a range of counter-drone systems at its disposals. Iron Dome has been upgraded to be able to deal with drones. It's a primary response system. We're talking about Iranian drones. Hezbollah drones can technically also be dealt with the new laser system. I actually published a piece in JNS a couple of days ago asking where the laser system is. Maybe we'll get to that later. And you also have helicopters that go out and shoot these things down, fighter jets with their cannons, actually very effective, shooting them down beyond Israel's borders. And you also have other air defenses, missile defense systems like the Barak, which is made by a different company. So, you have a multiple, both aircraft and ground-based air defense systems that if it's detected in time, the drones don't ever hit their targets.
So we'll talk a little bit about the ballistic missiles, which have potentially been the most dangerous of the threats. You mentioned that the assessment is Iran began this war with 2,500 ballistic missiles. According to just some brief calculations I was doing as you were mentioning that number, they've probably fired about half of their stockpiles to date since this war began. But let's talk about the sophistication of the ballistic missile system. They have many different types of ballistic missiles, many different ranges, different payloads, also some hypersonic, some cluster. Give us a little bit of an overview of what Iran has been firing since this war began.
Yeah, and they also said yesterday that they fired the Sigil missile for the first time. I'm not sure that it's really the first time, but that's what they claim. Yeah, for sure. Look, Iran, has had the Middle East's largest and most varied missile arsenal, actually probably the world's, I would say, in terms of just purely the surface-to-surface missile arsenal. And I would really divide these missiles into a couple of categories. First of all, the most important one is solid fuel versus liquid fuel. You may have heard that thrown around, and it's very relevant. Not in terms of the missile. Once it's in the air, and it's very similar kind of threat for the air defense systems. But in terms of the preparations for launching them, a liquid fuel missile requires days of preparations. You have to mix the chemicals, oxidate them, make sure that they don't blow up. And all of that preparation leaves an intelligence footprint. It's much easier to prevent a liquid missile launch than it is to prevent a solid fuel missile launch, because the solid fuels, once you have that solid fuel, you need very little time. You can just really prepare the missile, leave it fueled up with solid fuel, and away it goes. That's why the Iranians prefer the solid fuel missiles. So those are two important categories. Now, other than that, they fired a whole range of their missiles, the Imad and what they call the Sakin and the Sigil. And we've heard the cluster warhead. So just to create a little bit of order, all of the Iranian ballistic missiles that are heading to Israel, all of them without exception, they follow a ballistic trajectory. What that means is they go up, they exit the Earth's atmosphere, and then they re-enter. The missile warhead splits off from the engine. That's why you may sometimes see the engine part just fall away. That's why the Home Front Command requires that people stay in their shelter for several minutes, sometimes 10 minutes, until they all clear. And the warhead is navigated by usually two systems. It's either GPS or it's called inertial. Inertial is an onboard computer, which is less accurate than satellite, but still pretty accurate. It measures how fast the missile is gone, and it calculates where it is, and that can't be disrupted, the inertial navigational system, because it's completely internal. And then in terms of the cluster, if it's a cluster missile, submunitions, what that means is that the warhead opens up if it manages to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere over Israeli airspace, and it releases dozens and dozens of munitions, of cluster munitions, spreading them out over the Israeli home front. This is a war crime. This is something that the Iranians have been doing every single day. It's a complete war crime. Now, in terms of interception,
why is it a war crime? Explain.
Because you're indiscriminately targeting urban centers with submunitions. These are not guided. These are deliberately designed to kill as many civilians as possible.
And we've seen that the cluster bombs can hit ranges with a radius of up to 8 to 10 kilometers.
Exactly right. Exactly right. The only silver lining here is that the cluster bombs are much less powerful. You're talking about several kilograms of warhead than a direct hit from a warhead, which can be up to a ton. So if you're in a safe room or a shelter, even if it sustains a direct hit from a cluster, you're going to be fine. But if you're out there, then it's very, very dangerous.
Let's talk a little bit about the Israeli defense on the home front against the ballistic missiles. You talked a little bit about the systems that can intercept the ballistic missiles. Certainly cluster bombs are much more difficult to intercept because you're talking about multiple submunitions falling simultaneously, and you don't really have the time to calculate exactly where they're going to go before you try to intercept them. But obviously the home front's own ability to get into protected rooms and bomb shelters is a significant portion of the country's defense against ballistic missiles, right? If you didn't have these alerts, the home front command alerts on the phone, if you didn't have safe rooms and bomb shelters, if you didn't know when missiles were coming, the whole country would be in chaos. Tell me a little, if you can, let's describe the whole home front command system, how it works, and how actually Israelis are able to find out that a missile's incoming, get into a bomb shelter, exit a bomb shelter, and kind of go about and have your day in between these missile attacks.
Yeah, 100%. So that part, the civil defense system that you're describing is actually the third and last layer. The first is the air defenses. Actually, if we want to be even more accurate, we can say that the first layer of defense is the offense. It's the striking of the missile launchers. In many ways, that's the first layer of defense. But defensively speaking, it's the multi-layered air defense system, starting with Arrow 3 in space, Arrow 2, David Sling, Iron Dome, and then comes the part that you just referred to, which is the world's most advanced civil alert defense system. What's happening here is this is a partnership between the Israeli Air Force. The Israeli Air Force is the entity that provides the warning, the specific warning, because its radars are tracking the missiles. So they have a projection. Once they see that a ballistic missile or a volley is heading our way, their computers will automatically start simulating where those missiles are supposed to be hitting. And then that information gets instantly transmitted to the Home Front Command. The IDF Home Front Command has divided the state of Israel into more than 600 polygons. These are basically cells. Imagine the state of Israel divided into over 600 cells. And the more divisions, the more accurate the alert. The goal here is really, as you say, Alex, to be able to give you as much of your day as possible, the minimal disruption. So they have to factor in things like the cluster distribution radius up to 10 kilometers and debris and everything else. Once all of these calculations are made using artificial intelligence, and this is done in nanoseconds, then the alerts are issued. Now, we've also had the privilege, and I say the privilege because here in central Israel, it is a privilege compared to the north, of having an early alert. That means that once the missiles are already over Iranian airspace, we are getting alerts saying you don't have to go into shelter now, but be near a shelter. And they keep improving the accuracy of that in terms of area. So there are fewer and fewer false early alerts. And then comes the real-time alert, as we had at the beginning of this webinar. And, this is a very, very precise area distribution-based alert. And that is designed to protect you. That's the last leg of defense, that and your safe room. and that comes after everything else that we've described. Striking the launchers, the air defenses, the radars, and then you get that early alert.
Now, being inside a safe room might not hold up if there's a direct hit from a ballistic missile with a 1-ton or greater warhead. But we've seen that most of the missiles that are falling are either falling in empty areas or not directly on a shelter. And the shelters do provide reasonable protection against shrapnel, against the sub-munitions of the cluster bombs. And when you're inside those bomb shelters, you are often hearing, you go in and then you wait a couple minutes and you start to hear the booms over the sky. And these are the interceptions. And sometimes you actually hear, and I've been in this studio where we've felt the whole building shake. And you talked earlier about that ballistic missile that hit in Beit Shemesh, which is more than 10 miles from here. But the whole building shook when that missile struck. But tell me a little bit about the accuracy of the interception rates, if we know, what percentage of the Iranian ballistic missiles have been intercepted by Israeli air defenses?
Yeah, and that shake that you're describing, that's the shock wave, which in and of itself is very dangerous. If people are close to it unprotected, the shock wave itself can kill and injure on its own. The interception rate is very high. I've been hunting myself for the exact percentage. I haven't received it yet, but my suspicion is that it's hovering at around 90%. I'm looking to corroborate that from official military sources, but it seems to me that that's more or less where we're at. Let's take into consideration the fact that the volleys that we're looking at, even though the frequency might sometimes be high, they're not very big, these volleys. In the past war, this is, by the way, another sign that the Iranian capabilities are gradually weakening. In the past war, they were firing 40, 50, 60, 70 missiles per volley. Now it's basically a tenth of that. So that makes it much more, let's say, doable for the Israeli air defenses to tackle this threat. So it seems to me that the air defense systems are working very well. The Arrow 3 system is a marvel. It's a technological marvel. It's not just an interceptor that goes into space. It actually releases, once it's in space, a separate vehicle that uses the starlight to navigate and crashes head-on into a kinetic crash with the Iranian warhead in space. That's the first line of defense. I think it's the most advanced interception system of its kind in the world. And then, on top of that, you've got other options. The whole system is based on the idea that if you miss the first attempt, you've got lower layers. It gives you further attempts, like the Arrow 2 and David's Sling. So when you put it all together, the system is absolutely working, and it's working well.
Let's talk a little bit about where else Iran has been sending missiles. We would have thought perhaps that that Israel would get the brunt of the ballistic missiles and drones. But actually, if you look at the overall distribution, you've seen that Iran has targeted many countries across the Gulf. Several of those countries are housing U.S. air bases. Some of those countries have direct relations with Israel. Some of them have, under the surface relations with Israel. And most likely, none of these countries have the same type of level of air defenses that Israel have, making them more vulnerable to the attacks. Maybe we can talk a little bit about where Iran has fired and what kind of damage they've done across the Middle East.
I think the latest count, Alex, is 13 countries. It might be 13 countries if you include Turkey and Cyprus. Cyprus, by the way, the first time that Iran has fired on a European Union member. Israel has said all along that Europe is next.
Yeah, I see here Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Oman, Cyprus, Turkey, Azerbaijan.
Yeah, Oman, the mediator. Qatar. So look, first I think that what's happening here. Yeah, I think that what's happening here is, first of all, it's not only that Iran is firing on countries that have military bases, U.S. military bases there. It is also that, in my view, of course, it's punishing them for hosting American forces. But I think it's more than that. I think what the Iranians are trying to do is they're trying to create a panicked war lobby made up of Gulf states, wealthy Gulf states who are seeing war and chaos come to their lands, affecting their ability to export energy and threatening their economies and their glass towers. And I think what they're trying to do is, based on the knowledge that these countries have close relations with the Trump administration, they're trying to send them in Trump's direction in order to plead for the war to end. Now, is that strategy working? I don't see any clear signs that it's working, but that is what they're trying to do, and it's important to note that, because often it's described as sort of lashing out and desperate, but I think it's actually it is pretty desperate, because if the regime survives, it's going to pay a very heavy price in terms of future relations. But I think it's calculated, because when you fire this amount of missiles, then you... Sorry, were you saying something?
I said it seems to the contrary, that it's actually what it's done is caused Iran to be tremendously isolated. It's also improved, I think, Israel and the United States' case that Iran was a threat to the entire Middle East, not only a threat to Israel, and that this needed to be done because of the threats that all these other countries perceived in Iran. And you see exactly what they've been doing with their weapons. The second they come under attack, they start lashing out at the entire region. So not only have they destabilized countries like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, before these military adventures that these countries are having now, but you see that they do pose a significant threat to these other countries around the region, to the extent that now we're even seeing countries like the United Arab Emirates participating in offensive strikes against Iran.
100%. I agree with everything you said. I have to add, though, that I'm personally disappointed in the Gulf states because they are being attacked, and Iran has declared war on them. And I would expect a self-respecting country to join the coalition officially, not to strike in the dark as they appear to have been doing, not to continue to try and de-escalate, even if it's just publicly. I would expect a self-respecting country, if it's attacked, to join the coalition and fight back. And we're not seeing that. We're not seeing that. I think it's disappointing. I think it lowers the prestige of these countries, even in Israel's eyes. I have to be honest with you, Alex. If we were talking about normalization, and yes, the UAE is a very important asset, but when we're talking about Saudi normalization and the things that the Saudis expected, they're not willing to fight back officially against a country that's raining down drones and missiles on them, because they want to hedge their bets and protect their wealth. So I think that lowers their strategic value, and I think that they're going to have to answer some very tough questions after this war is over, because really, they should have joined the coalition. But certainly, regarding the first question that you asked, they're in the line of fire because the Iranians, it's much easier for them to target them. It's much easier for them to send short-range missiles and drones in their direction. And I completely agree with what you said earlier. If there was any question left about Iran being a global menace, a global jihadist menace that has no red lines, the masks have finally fallen. And I guess that's why I'm pretty disappointed in the Gulf states, because they're still trying to walk this tightrope. They're still trying to hedge and maintain relations with every side. I don't think that that's really sustainable going forward if this regime continues, but we'll have to see how they continue to navigate.
At the same time, to play a little bit of devil's advocate, if you have the United States, the world's largest air force, and Israel, the world's #2 air force, who are working in concert with one another, and you talked about the complexities of operating over the skies of Iran, getting other players that might not have those levels of sophistication and communications involved might make things more difficult, right? If you know that the United States and Israel can handle Iran by themselves, perhaps it's better, or maybe signals are being sent to these other countries like, just stay out of it. We'll take care of the situation. You just stand by while we're doing what we're doing. But the other side of that is what happens on the day after. You mentioned that these countries might have to answer questions about their roles in the war, but a country that will not have to answer any questions about its role in the region is Israel. And you're already starting to see, and we'll talk about this later. I don't think we should talk about it right now, but too much, that these other countries may come a lot closer toward Israel in the aftermath of this war. But when we talk about Iran, their leverage was the nuclear threat, which is being eliminated. Their leverage was the ballistic missiles, which they're sending all across the region. But their other leverage, of course, that everybody in the world, and especially the United States, understands, are the very strategic Straits of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, the source of 20% of the world's oil, one of the busiest commercial waterways, everybody in the world consuming oil for manufacturing, for automotive usage. And we're seeing that Iran is being very active in the Straits, mining the Straits of Hormuz, attacking ships in the Persian Gulf. If you can, a little bit to explain what Iran has been doing to destabilize the ability of ships to get through the Straits of Hormuz.
Right. So just as Iran is trying to hold hostage the Gulf and create this anti-war lobby, they're trying to do exactly the same by basically disrupting and throwing into chaos the global energy market by basically shutting down the Straits of Hormuz, which you very accurately described as the most strategically important waterway when it comes to the export of energy on this planet. And this affects not only Iran's own ability to export oil. By the way, there's a real paradox here in what they're doing. They're also shutting down their own ability to export to China, which is their main oil client. 90% of Iranian oil is purchased by China. But of course, they're also targeting the Saudi, the Kuwaiti, the Qatari ability to export oil. It's interesting to note that the Saudis have already activated a sort of backup plan, and they're trying to now export their energy from the Red Sea. If you look at a map of Saudi Arabia, they've got a Red Sea coast as well, Jeddah and those kinds of places. They're trying to export from there. They've activated some pipelines. I don't know how much this can compensate for their Hormuz export. It's not clear, but whichever way you look at it, and you can see the oil market, it's responding. The prices are rising. There's major disruption there. Here's a few things to take into consideration. First of all, most of the Iranian Navy has been destroyed by the United States military. So even their mine-laying vessels have mostly been eliminated, to my understanding. What they have left is probably some tactical smaller vessels, and they probably have some surface-to-sea missiles, perhaps cruise missiles that they can use to harass vessels. They've also got ballistic missiles, but the ability to hit a vessel with a ballistic missile is very much in doubt. I think that the Iranians haven't really been able to prove that they can do that, but the cruise missiles are a big threat, and these sort of bomb-laden tactical vessels and swarms, these are all things that the Iranians might still have up their sleeves. Let's also remember that Karaj Island, or Karag, depending on how you pronounce it, which is their main oil export island, all of the military installations on that island were destroyed by the United States in the past 48 hours. So we're seeing the United States clean up pretty nicely in the Hormuz Straits. And now the next goal, and this is what President Trump is trying to secure, is a naval coalition that will escort the oil tankers of other countries, and that would deny the ability of the Iranians to disrupt future oil exports from other Gulf countries, because those accompanying vessels would have air defense systems on them, so they could protect and they could also strike back. Now, other countries have been. I have no other way to use to describe this except cowardice. Most of these countries have displayed absolute cowardice when it comes to joining this coalition. They don't want to get their hands dirty. This war is not popular in their courts of public opinion, and President Trump is very, very unhappy with that. The U.S. Navy can absolutely do this on its own, but he's saying, why should it? So at the end of the day, we are seeing, I think, a future battle over the Straits of Hormuz, and I think it's not going to go Iran's way, Alex, because their ability to disrupt this strait is being degraded by the hour. And eventually, once the U.S. Navy frees itself up from combat operations, it's going to be able to start escorting those ships if that becomes necessary. So at the end of the day, the oil will start flowing from those other Gulf countries. And the Iranians also have a big interest in resuming oil exports. Almost all of their money comes from oil exports to China. So they're also, holding their own economy hostage.
Let's look at a little bit about the chain of command. The first strike in this war was to take out the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and many of his top advisors. You mentioned across 3 different meetings. You would think that perhaps cutting off this head of the terror octopus, going after the supreme leader, might be a demoralizing act that caused mass defections. But we're seeing, despite those attacks on the top level of the command and all of the attacks on the strategic infrastructure, I think we're talking about well over 1,000, maybe between 1,000 and 2,000 attacks on strategic sites inside Iran, that Iran continues to fight. What do we know about the chain of command, the various different brigades. I don't know what the right word for that is, of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. What's their ability to continue fighting?
Well, and on top of your question, Alex, with your permission, I'm going to add another question that we've had here from Julia, that she's saying that officials are saying that regime change is not one of the goals. Is there a chance that the war will stop before the job is finished? And I think that ties in pretty closely to your question. So look, in terms of the chain of command, the main chain of command that we are dealing with here right now, that's at the top of the priority list as far as the Israeli Air Force, is the IRGC missile unit. It's part of the IRGC airspace command, and they have missile units. They've divided all of Iran into districts. Every district has a missile commander, and they receive orders to try and coordinate at a national Iranian level the missile launches in our direction. So they've gone from firing dozens of these a day to a tenth of that and less as time goes by, because they are being systematically eliminated. So that's one aspect. Now, the IRGC is a huge organization. We're talking about something like 130, 140,000 operatives, and that's not including, the militia members that are associated by extension. So it's not something that you can wipe out in the space of 2 weeks, but you can certainly degrade the missile capabilities, and many, and I would say most of the command bases, the IRGC's command bases, as you say, 2,000 of Israel's airstrikes have been dedicated towards eliminating a whole series of command and control bases that are designed to enable the IRGC to fire missiles, to fire drones, to operate their navy, to operate the Quds Force. The Quds Force is that unit, that special unit that belongs to the IRGC that's responsible for equipping and activating Hezbollah and the militias in Iraq and the Houthis. So, all of Iran's projection of power. Many of these terrorist operatives have been killed in Iran. So they're no longer in communication in many ways. They're cut off from their proxies. So we're seeing, once these command centers are eliminated, just the infrastructure, the computer systems, the communication systems, and the commanders themselves. You mentioned the opening strike. In that opening strike, Iran lost the commander of the IRGC, the whole of the IRGC. He was a replacement of a replacement. His two predecessors were eliminated back in June. The same is true of the Iranian chief of staff. He was a replacement of a replacement. We're seeing third replacements eliminated. His two predecessors were killed back in June. So this is creating demoralization. The Iranians are not going to advertise that, but the fact that they're not safe anywhere in their own country, if we try and even imagine a similar situation, Alex, in our country, God forbid, but, imagine our chief of staff and heads of intelligence, and, they're being, God forbid, targeted in their own bases. Imagine what that would cause us, and project that onto the Iranians. This is not a terror organization. This is a sovereign country that's being hunted in its own capital and its own bunkers and bases throughout the land. So this is definitely creating chaos in their ability to function, in their ability to fight. But they did prepare contingencies for this situation. So for every senior figure, they have backups. This is a 92 million strong country. They're not short on numbers. And these backups, even if they're inexperienced, they step into the role and they try to pick up where their predecessor left off. And that's what we're seeing. That's why they are able to continue to function, even though it's at a greatly reduced capacity, really, really reduced capacity. In fact, I can say yesterday, I was told by a defense official that even in terms of missiles, what we're experiencing today is significantly below the worst case scenario that the Israeli Air Force have been planning for. So they're damaged, they're bleeding, they're paralyzed, they're fearful, but they are able to continue to function in an asymmetric manner because that's what they were built to do.
Early on in the war, I spoke to a senior official in the Prime Minister's office, and he told me without a doubt that regime change is one of the goals of this war. And we see that the first strike in this war was to take out the supreme leader. I think it would be a disappointment for Israel to see this operation stop before the conditions are set for a regime change. And that doesn't mean that Israel thinks that they can affect the regime change on their own. They're putting a lot of faith in their public statements, at least, in the Iranian people. But the President Trump, he had stated early on during these protests, we had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Iranians in the streets before This war began with estimates that the Basij, the shock troops of the IRGC, were taking out as many as 32,000, but I've heard other estimates as much as 100,000 people gunned down in the streets. And the president said help is on the way. And a few times we've heard the prime minister say, the help has arrived. The president saying the help has arrived. And we saw that Israel, the United States, using drones actually to attack besieged checkpoints. These are checkpoints set up by the Basij in order to prevent the protesters from gathering in large numbers. What do we know about the Israeli-American efforts to take down the Basij and to set the tables for the Iranian people to rise up and get back in the streets, and this time potentially to be more successful than when they were in previous rounds of protest?
Right, and this goes back to the question of the regime change being a goal or not. So here's the thing. Here's the complication. There's no question that we all want to see the regime fall. Not in doubt. That's the ultimate outcome. And there's no question that the IDF is doing everything it can in this campaign to try and increase the chances that the regime will fall. When you look at the target list, what are you looking for when you're looking for regime destabilization targets? Basij. Basij is the main thing you want to hit if you want to increase the chances of the regime falling. The Basij headquarters are being hit massively, really just throughout the land, and especially in western Iran, which is interesting because that's where the Iranian Kurdish opposition groups who are armed, unlike the Persian opposition, the Kurdish opposition is armed, and you're seeing a very heavy concentration, clusters of strikes on Basij headquarters. The problem is that the Basij, like I said earlier, 1 million or to 2 million paramilitary members, and you cannot get rid of that number of people in airstrikes. It's just not physically possible. It doesn't add up mathematically. So you can take out their bunkers, you can take out their headquarters, you can disrupt them, and you can encourage the Iranian people to rise up. Now, in order for the regime to fall, at least to my understanding, what needs to happen is either the Persian opposition has to be better armed so that they can start storming these checkpoints on the ground and seize centers of power. And we don't know when that might happen. I believe, just to be clear, I believe that one day this regime is going to fall. I really believe that. I just don't know if the conditions are there right now because we don't know how many guns are in the hands of these opposition members. Or alternatively, we would need to see sections of the Iranian army, not necessarily the IRGC. These are two separate entities, by the way. Iran has a two-military system. The IRGC is designed to defend the elite of the regime from amongst other things, from the army. That's one of the lessons that the Ayatollahs drew from the downfall of the Shah. So the army has always been second tier, but the army itself has been purged for years. Its commanders have been tested for ideological loyalty. It's a complicated story, Alex. So I'm looking for signs of cracks, of fissures in the regime. And I think that everything is being done to accelerate that, to act as a catalyst. But this is no longer the realm of military planning. You know, military planners can see I've knocked out 75% of missile launchers. I've rolled back the nuclear weapons sites. Those are quantifiably measurable. But what you can't measure is a mood or a population's determination. I think they're in deep trauma from what happened to them in January. This was a massacre and one of the worst war crimes in modern history. And I think we don't know when they're going to act. It could be in 2 days. It could be in 2 months. It could be longer. And I would recommend that we be patient, that we work towards weakening the enemy, the head of the snake. That's the most important thing. And we continue to try and get the regime to fall through every means possible. But we also have to be patient and understand that we're dealing with a historical process here. And this already leaves the field of military discipline, and it enters the discipline of political science or whatever you want to call it. It's much foggier. It's not quantifiable. You can't really measure it. All you can do is inject catalysts to try and make it happen as fast as possible.
We know for Israel, this is a multi-front war, that Iran, part of their strategy was to set up this ring of terror proxies. Israel's been fighting those terror proxies since October 7th. Now we're operating on two fronts. Before we start talking about Hezbollah and Lebanon, and obviously there's a lot to discuss there, let's first discuss the terror proxy that we thought might enter this war, but so far has not, and that's the Houthis in Yemen. Maybe we can address reasons why you assess that the Houthis have not joined into the battle.
So it seems that the Houthis, for the first time, in a while, in about 2.5 years, they're rhetorically very committed to fighting, and yet de facto are not firing a single missile or bullet. And that could be down to a few things. They claim that they're waiting to receive the order from the Iranians on when they should step in, and that could be true. Let's not rule them out so quickly. But I think it's also due to the fact that their missile arsenal has been severely depleted during the 2 years that they spent fighting with Israel and the United States, that they're still recovering from the fact that much of their cabinet was wiped out by the Israeli Air Force, and they haven't had much success in being able to restock their missile arsenal from Iran, because the Israeli and American naval presence in the Red Sea has been greatly stepped up. So when you put it all together, they're much less well-positioned to join this war, and they're more vulnerable. But having said that, I wouldn't rule them out. Even if they do join this war, Alex, there's no question that the Israeli Air Force has contingency plans to send jets and drones to Yemen if necessary to strike. Those plans are at the ready, and it's not going to make a big difference. They're not a strategic game changer. Their capabilities are much more marginal when we compare them to Iran and even to Hezbollah. So they could join, but even if they do, it's not going to be a game changer.
Hezbollah, on the other hand, even though they stayed out over the first few days of the war, this past week we saw Hezbollah fire 200 rockets and missiles into Israel, mostly pummeling the north. What do you think Hezbollah's strategic goals are here? And then we can obviously talk about what Israel intends to do in retaliation.
Sure. Well, Hezbollah received the order from Iran to join on March 2nd. This was a direct order from Tehran. That's what I'm hearing from the defense officials. And they also, viewed Ayatollah Khamenei as a holy figure. So there wasn't very much doubt that they would join. And then as soon as they joined on March 2nd, they fired 2 volleys of rockets. And you heard Naim Qassem, their Secretary General, say afterwards, these are small volleys. You didn't have to go to war over this, because he seems to have failed to understand that this is a new Israel that he's facing, and it's not an Israel that's willing to accept equations from Hezbollah or dictates or distinguishes between 3 rockets and 30 and 300. Once you fire on Haifa, which they did, you are declaring war on this country, and you're going to be treated accordingly. So that was looks like a very big failure to assess the new Israel by Hezbollah. And as soon as they've done that, we're now in a 2-arena situation. This also, by the way, brings me to another question that we had just before you joined us from the siren. Somebody was asking, how long is this war going to go on for? 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and what's the difference between preparing for that amount of time and actually fighting it? We had a couple of questions on the length. And so here's how I would look at it. I would distinguish between the Iranian arena and the Lebanese arena. I think they're operating according to separate timelines. The Iranian arena, I think ultimately the decision maker for how long that's going to last is going to be President Trump. I think that I don't see any situation where they're going to stop the Americans and we're going to continue. This is a coordinated fight, and I think that coordination will extend to the decision to disengage whenever that comes, whenever that happens. So that arena might end up being over, I would say, sooner than the Lebanese arena. The Lebanese arena, it's only between Israel and Hezbollah. And today, just a few hours ago, we received notice that Division 91 has begun a targeted ground maneuver into southern Lebanon. This has been a long time coming. Hundreds of thousands of southern Lebanese civilians, most of them Shiites, have been evacuated. So these villages and towns are mostly empty, stripped of their human shields. And this is all about pushing Hezbollah away from the northern border, pushing it back so that it cannot launch cross-border terror attacks, so that it cannot terrorize the northern communities with rockets and anti-tank missiles, and possibly, Alex, expanding the security zone. Israel had a very narrow security zone in the past year and a half, 5 outposts. Now we're looking at a very likely, I would say, expansion of that, creating a real buffer zone to ensure that northern communities are not terrorized again. So this is a very dramatic moment. And because we have a ground offensive now in play, I would estimate that the northern arena is going to operate according to a different timeline. It's going to be longer than the Iranian arena. So hopefully that answers to at least some degree to questions about how long this is going to take. I think the Iranian arena is going to be shorter than the Lebanese arena because it's got a ground offensive component, the Lebanese arena, that's going to take time. That's more complicated than an air operation. Now these forces are going to start going through villages and clearing them out. They have bunkers in them. They have Hezbollah terrorists hiding in them. And this is going to be the main mission, to secure the northern borders. And we're going to see, I think, a number of weeks of combat before that arena settles down.
Do we know how many ground troops have been sent into southern Lebanon at this stage?
They haven't given a precise number. They usually don't do that in real time because, they don't want the other side to have a good estimate. But we know that the 91st Division officially received an order to move deeper into Lebanon this morning. And before that, we had sort of targeted operations. We had brigades going into villages, targeting Hezbollah infrastructure and coming back out. And, I think it's very important to also note that the whole concept of an October 7th, of an invasion by death squads and to terrorize and destroy a whole section of the country, that was Hezbollah's idea. That's what Hezbollah had planned for the Galilee region. And Hamas essentially copied and pasted it to the Western Negev in the south. This was Hezbollah's original brainchild. And so there is no question in my mind that Israel now has a big window of opportunity to move into southern Lebanon and to eliminate that threat once and for all, to never again allow it to form. On top of that, we've got the Israeli Air Force very busy in other parts of Lebanon, in Dakhya, etc. So right now, Lebanon is still a secondary arena, but as soon as you've got the ground offensive starting to roll, it takes up a lot more attention of the IDF. The Air Force also has to provide air cover for these troops.
Exactly. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that division of the Air Force, because clearly Israel is operated in its primary theater, which is Iran, and they're working together with the United States. And I'm certain the United States doesn't want to see all of a sudden the Israeli Air Force pull out and leave the United States operating by itself in Iran. And you said that a ground operation inside Lebanon does require air support. So what's the sort of division right now? How much air support is Israel able to provide troops inside Lebanon right now? And like a secondary question, if, as you mentioned, the Iran theater ends a little bit earlier, will Israel then be able to divert more air attention to Lebanon and potentially send in even additional ground troops to have a much broader operation inside Lebanon?
So the answer to your second question is yes, absolutely. I mean, this is resource allocation. Once you shut down the Iran arena, then basically most of the Air Force becomes available for Lebanon. So that will make a big difference. It's important to note that all of this has been planned, Alex. This operational contingency of having to deal with Iran and Hezbollah. The chances of Hezbollah joining this war were always high to begin with, especially if we're talking about eliminating Ayatollah Khamenei. So this is a phased, planned, multi-arena operation that we're seeing underway. So absolutely, I think that right now, most of the Air Force's resources are still dedicated to Iran, particularly if this is going to be a time-limited operation. There's a real window of opportunity, what they call in sports the money time, to take out as many targets per 24 hours per possible with the assistance of the United States.
And when you talk about targets, you have to think about Hezbollah's own missile stocks, which were very, very significant prior to October 7th. I had heard various security experts estimating that Hezbollah may have possessed before October 7th anywhere between 100 to 150,000 rockets and missiles of various short range, medium range, longer range, precision guided degrees. We had heard that with the ceasefire that was signed in November of 2024, at that point that Israel assessed that they had filed down Hezbollah's capabilities by as much as maybe 70%. But if you were talking about 150,000 rockets and missiles to begin with, if you file down, 2/3 of them or 80%, you could still have tens of thousands of rockets and missiles. What do we know about how much stockpile Hezbollah has and their ability to fire and really penalize Israeli population centers?
Oh, absolutely. Those estimates are exactly what I've been hearing. And by the way, if you add mortars to that, then on the eve of October 7th, Hezbollah would have surpassed 200,000 projectiles. And some of these mortars have ranges that go beyond 5 kilometers. Some of them can even get to 8, 9 kilometers. So they're just as deadly in the short range as the rockets. And now greatly reduced, but still you see that the north is being hit by sometimes dozens of rockets and UAVs per day. Sometimes it's more than 100. Certainly, the north is under sustained fire, and their situation is a lot tougher than ours here in the center. They have no early warning system. Some of them have very little time. They have not been evacuated, which is a very critical difference from this stage of the war.
Why do you think that is? Yeah.
The reason that they're not being evacuated is because there is no major threat of a ground invasion by Hezbollah's elite Radwan force. There is still a threat, a limited threat. I'm actually shortly going to file a story detailing this to be published on the website, on the JNS website. But the Radwan force is basically operating in small cells, and it can still try to infiltrate. They've sent several hundred of these terrorists down south to fight with the IDF and to try and infiltrate. But this threat of a massive invasion, that's what we were looking at in the north as well on October 8th. That's what caused 60,000 Israelis to become internally displaced, basically internal war refugees. That threat is gone. That threat is gone. And that's why they haven't been evacuated. And it's critical. It's critical that they're not evacuated, because there's a symbolism here. You know, these frontline communities, Alex, and a lot of them are agricultural communities, and also, you know, the cities, the idea of standing firm and holding the line as civilians, being protected by military ahead of you, past the border in the red zone in the enemy territory, I think is really symbolically very, very important, both to us, to as Israelis, and to the enemy, that they understand that they cannot, at the click of a finger, cause, once again, wide-scale evacuation, because that only encourages their depraved ideology, which is dedicated towards the goal of destroying this country. So that's very important that they're not evacuated, and that Hezbollah cannot threaten them with a massive ground invasion like it could in the past. And now what's left is exactly what you described. We're looking at approximately 20,000 projectiles left in Hezbollah's arsenal. We're looking at a ground presence in those southern Lebanese villages and towns, which the Lebanese government utterly failed to take serious action against, despite all of their claims and their press statements. The Lebanese army had no real intention of clashing with Hezbollah. All of this was a show, Alex. They didn't demilitarize anything in southern Lebanon. The Lebanese government would very much like to get rid of Hezbollah, but it can't. There's a big gap between what it wants to do and what it can do. A lot of that is because half of the Lebanese army is made up of Shiites, soldiers and commanders who come from exactly the same towns and villages that Hezbollah come from, and they don't want to fight their brethren. They don't want to get into firefights with their brethren. So they're incapable, and this is Israel's window of opportunity to really and permanently change the security landscape in the north of Israel and to greatly reduce the threat, just as we've been able to do in the south, in Gaza.
We hear a lot about the Litani River, being several miles north of the border between Israel and Lebanon, and a ground operation that might be geared towards controlling all of the territory between Israel and the Litani River, similar to what we've seen in Gaza, whereby now the IDF controls 53% of the territory in the Gaza Strip, and turning all of this area in south of the Litani River into what Israel did in Gaza, which is basically destroying 70% plus of the infrastructure there. Is this a goal of the IDF to actually go as far north as the Litani River and to take over the territory?
So this is what I've been trying to figure out for the past 48 hours, Alex. And the truth of the matter is that the cabinet is keeping its cards close to its chest. We don't yet know. It's a fair assumption that that's an operational goal, but we have not seen that yet happen on the ground. And when they talk about the start of a ground operation today, which they did, They didn't say how far they're going to go for obvious reasons. You know, they don't want the enemy to know. So if we want to stick to the facts, the real answer is that nobody knows except the decision makers, the cabinet and the general staff and Northern Command. All of the commanders who are in charge of this operation, they know how far they're going to go. Nobody else right now does. I think it's a fair assumption that they might get to the Litani. Also, it's worth noting that the Litani is not equally distant from the Israeli border. There are some parts of Lebanon where it's tens of kilometers away, and some parts of Lebanon where it's much closer. So we have to look at the map of Lebanon. But I think that at least the third, fourth layer of villages, if we can call it that, they divide them into sort of lines of villages. I think Hezbollah is going to be uprooted in those villages. Some of that will be at the Litani. Some may be short of that. We don't yet know what the real orders are that have been given, but I think we're going to find out very soon.
Well, we have been hearing calls for a negotiated settlement already between Israel and Lebanon. French President Emmanuel Macron calling for negotiations, said he would work with the United States to broker negotiations. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, was actually inside Lebanon this week, just as the Israeli attacks were getting started. Now, the question is, if we look back at the negotiated settlement, the ceasefire agreement that was signed in November 2024, Israel signed an agreement with Lebanon. Hezbollah wasn't a party to that agreement. So people that are calling for negotiated settlement with Lebanon, and people are even suggesting that the Lebanese government might consider normalizing relations with Israel. That to me, that all sounds great. But on the other hand, if you have this terror organization that's holding most of Lebanon hostage and is not party to an agreement, it has 20,000 missiles pointed right at you, who are you negotiating with? And can a negotiated settlement avert the threat that will always exist from Hezbollah?
So yeah, that's exactly the right question, Alex. And in my view, the answer is no. It doesn't matter. Even if the Lebanese government has the best intentions, what's measured here on the ground is capability. They don't have the capability to make good on what they say, and that's why I'm all in favor of talking to the Lebanese government. This is a much better government than we've had in a long time in Lebanon. I think that they're rational and they're forward-looking and they're willing to coexist with the state of Israel. Great. That doesn't solve our security problem. We have to first solve our security problem. And one of the lessons of October 7th is there is no more containment. There is no more outsourcing our critical security needs to anybody, not to Lebanon, not to Macron, but nobody is going to do the job for us. Hezbollah has to be uprooted from southern Lebanon and from Beirut, by the way, though there are different ways of doing that. And there's nobody that's going to do this job for us. So I think that what's interesting here, when will the Lebanese government become more interesting in my eyes? After this operation, when Hezbollah is significantly degraded, then they'll have a chance to prove their worth. Then they'll have a chance to say, and they have to be tested. What we have to say to them as Israelis is show us where you confront Hezbollah. Don't go into a village and say you've inspected it and walk out while you're leaving bunkers of arms untouched, anti-tank missiles, which, by the way, were intended as anti-house missiles. All of the thousands of anti-tank missiles and RPGs that Hezbollah had buried in the villages of southern Lebanon, those were designed for Hezbollah's death squads for the northern October 7th. So when the Lebanese army says, oh, we walked into this village, we checked it during the ceasefire, we didn't find anything. Of course you didn't find anything because you didn't go into the homes. You just patrolled the village. Who are they fooling? So that we need to see real determination. Go ahead and clash with Hezbollah. Show us that you can take them on. And if they do, then I think that we can start taking them more seriously. Until then, it's just nice words and not much more than that, unfortunately.
Well, with regard to Iran, we heard this week IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Effie Defrin said that this could last for 3 more weeks, that there are thousands of targets, that the IDF is not working according to a timetable, but rather to achieve goals. We also heard U.S. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright say that he expects this war to last several more weeks. Tell me, what are we looking at just over the next several days to know if Israel is getting closer to achieving its goals?
Yeah, this goes back to the question we had earlier. Look, it's important to distinguish and somebody asked about this. The IDF says it's ready to fight for several more weeks. In Iran, that doesn't actually tell us that that's what's going to happen. In war, there's always psychological warfare, and every public message that we hear about duration, released by any side, including the Iranians, is designed to influence the decision-making of the other side. Everybody wants everybody else to think that they can do this for a long time. Now, there's no question in my mind that Israel and the United States can do this for weeks on end. They certainly have the capability. I don't doubt that at all. But because I think that President Trump is the chief decision maker on the duration, and I think that he's facing, let's call it, multiple considerations that go way beyond the IDF's own target bank, what remains, et cetera, et cetera. He's got a whole bunch of other, I think, political issues that he's taking into consideration. He may decide, Alex, in a certain amount of time, that the war has come to its end. And we don't know when that's going to happen. So that's why I think we're seeing very intensive strikes, because it could come sooner rather than later. So there's no knowing. We're in the fog of war. Everybody is signaling to the enemy that they can keep doing this for a long time. But at the end of the day, I think it's President Trump. It's not Israel or the IDF that's going to determine the length of this war. I think it's President Trump. So we have to see. We have to see how long he's going to give this. And whatever he does, by the way, just to make it clear from my end, the role that President Trump is playing here, not only for Israel's security, but really for global security, is historic. It's absolutely historic for him to recognize the threat and greenlight this operation and support the Israeli operation and send the American military into this operation is something that's going to improve the security of generations, and nothing can take that away from him. We'll have to see when he decides that it's over. As far as Lebanon, as I've said, I think that's going to go on for longer. We've got ground operations in action. They've started their movement deep into Lebanon. I really struggle to see that happening, an end to that happening anytime soon.
Is there any concerns, as we saw reports in Reuters and Semaphore and others, that Israel could be running out of air defenses?
I've heard from defense officials about that. They're telling me it's nonsense. That's what they're telling me. There's no shortage of air defenses, and you know, I think that we can, even just using logic, we can understand that they're right, and I'll tell you why. Because the Iranian missile production, right, the factories that supply the Iranians with missiles, they're completely out of commission. They're producing 0 missiles since this war began because they're in ruins. Very simple. Israel's military industries are working around the clock, producing 24/7 massive production lines, as of course are the American. So just if you look at that, right, the fact that we are being resupplied continuously, we're not running out of munitions. Of course, you know, many munitions have been fired, but add to the fact that we're producing constantly, the fact that the Iranians have fired far less than the worst case scenario of the IDF. And I think if you take these two factors into consideration together, you can conclude safely that these reports of us running out of munitions are fake news.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here. It wasn't a short briefing, but
so somebody here was asking about fake AI, which is a really important part of the psychological warfare and what's being done to deal with that, because certainly our enemies are spreading lots of ridiculous videos about Tel Aviv being destroyed, and Netanyahu had to prove that he's alive yesterday, with his famous coffee excursion. And I'll just say very quickly, because this was a question that was asked, that this is a global problem. This is not a uniquely Israeli problem, and the answer has got to be, in my view, technological. We're going to need systems. If we don't want to descend into information chaos that can be easily exploited by our enemies, we're going to need systems that automatically know, just like an antivirus can automatically flag a threat. Every video is going to have to run through one of these AI detectors and flag it, whether it's real or not. Otherwise, pretty soon we're not going to be able to tell the difference.
Well, again, we've covered a lot of ground here, and obviously the stakes are very high. War is not simple. We don't know what Iran's may have up its sleeve. We don't know what could happen. Every time a missile does not strike and kill tens or hundreds of people inside of Israel, it's actually somewhat miraculous in addition to all of the technology that we have. Israel's ability to fly all of these sorties, not to lose any planes from what we've heard so far in this campaign or during the 12-day campaign during Operation Rising Lion. Also somewhat miraculous in addition to the technological superiority and the bravery of our soldiers. But we will continue to cover all aspects of this war. I want to thank Yaakov Lapin, our military analyst, also does work for Miriam Institute and the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Where can people find your podcast?
If they just type into Google the Lapin assessment, they will find my podcast, various options there for signing up, and I encourage everybody to do that. And you can send me questions via that website, the Lapin assessment website. There's a forum or in the comments of my last posts. You're more than welcome to anything that I didn't address. Send me questions there on the Lapin assessment. I'm more than happy to continue to address your questions.
Thank you all for joining us on this podcast. Thank you especially to Yaakov Lapin for incredible analysis. And stay tuned to JNS. We will be with you again soon.